Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world of soot-streaked top hats, gas-lit alleyways, and a fog so thick you might forget what color your own boots are. Welcome to Victorian London. It's 1853, and you've just stepped off the train at Paddington Station. The air tastes like old coal and damp wool. Your first breath nearly makes you gag. And as you clutch your suitcase, unsure whether the figure approaching you is a helpful porter or someone about to sell you counterfeit boot polish, you realize this isn't going to be easy. You've arrived in the smoggy capital of the British Empire, at the exact moment it's most likely to kill you. Not with knives or duels or some poetic tragedy, but with soup. Not the edible kind, London particular, they call it. A pea-soup-thick fog made of soot, smoke, and industrial despair. It curls in your nostrils and coats your eyelashes. Welcome. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step out of the train station and right into the belly of the beast. The air is so thick even the gas lamps look like dying fireflies. Around you, the city breathes in wheezes. Horses snort, street vendors bark behind woolen scarves, and chimneys belch endlessly into a sky that has forgotten it's supposed to be blue. Your boots squish into something that might be cabbage, might be coal mush. You decide not to think about it. The first lesson of surviving Victorian London: keep walking. Slowly, deliberately. The fog has a strange way of tricking your balance, like a Victorian haunted house that never ends. Your suitcase thuds rhythmically against your leg, your other hand holding your hat down against the invisible wind. The city is eerily quiet, muffled, like cotton wadding in your ears. You pass by a man leaning against a lamppost, coughing into a handkerchief that looks like it's lost multiple fights. He doesn't acknowledge you, and you don't ask questions. Smart. You head toward a cheap lodging house recommended by your only contact in the city, a distant cousin who may or may not still live here. They say it's above a pie shop. That's promising, right? On the way, you get your first real look at Victorian signage, gaudy, loud and practically shouting. Dentures while you wait, patent mustard plasters, pure laudanum, approved by Her Majesty's midwife. Historians still argue whether people truly believed the claims on these signs or simply didn't care. After all, it's London, everything's a gamble. You pause outside a window full of wigs, each perched atop a pale, disembodied mannequin head. A little girl stares at you from inside, one eye obscured by soot on the glass. She points at your suitcase. You nod solemnly, not quite sure what you're agreeing to, and move on. The fog thickens as you enter a narrower street, where gaslights line up like tired sentries. One flickers as you pass, casting your shadow sideways across the cobblestones. It feels theatrical, like you're in a melodrama written by someone who's never been outdoors. You accidentally startle a dog-sized rat that scuttles into a sewer grate. You do not follow it. Eventually, you reach the pie shop, Mrs. Griggs Pies and Savories, and the lodging entrance is exactly where promised. A creaky staircase to the left of the shopfront, marked only by a soot-smudged sign that says, Rooms. You open the door and are hit with the mingled scent of boiled onions, coal smoke, and socks. You've made it. The landlady is surprisingly spry. She peers at you with a single glass eye, the other seemingly focused on a much earlier century. You offer her your shilling and your best attempt at charm. She doesn't smile, but she nods once and hands you a stub of candle. Your room is on the 3rd floor. It leans slightly to the left. As you climb the stairs, you hear the muffled snores and coughs of other lodgers. The wallpaper peels in strips like old parchment, and your boots leave vague imprints in the dust. The door to your room is just barely closed. It creaks open with the gentlest nudge. Inside, one lumpy bed, one pitcher of water, one mysterious stain on the wall. No complaints. You open the single window and breathe in the night air. Mist curls through the gap like it's trying to take the room back. Below, you hear the clop of a horse-drawn cab and the echo of laughter from a distant pub. And above, always above, the smoke. London breathes its black breath. You sit on the bed, boots still on, and glance around at your new kingdom of creaks and shadows. There's a sense of being on the edge, of something, of history, maybe of pneumonia. And so your first night begins in the smoggy, sprawling, soot-smudged heart of Victorian London. The fog presses against the glass. Somewhere, far off, a clock tower tolls 11. You close your eyes. You wake to the distant clatter of hooves and the smell of something burnt. At first, it's hard to tell if it's inside your room or simply wafting in from the city outside. The dim morning light creeps in like a bashful houseguest, pale and yellowed by layers of grime on the window pane. The air tastes like iron filings and old wool. You rise slowly, every bone complaining. Victorian beds, it turns out, are not known for their orthopedic support. The mattress feels like it's stuffed with horsehair and regret. You stagger to the pitcher of water in the corner, lukewarm and cloudy, but refreshing in its own hostile way, and splash your face. Now you're awake, which in this era might have been a mistake. Time to face the streets. You descend the stairs with the caution of someone navigating both history and an uncertain staircase. At the base, you're greeted by the lodger 2 floors down, a man in a waistcoat far too ambitious for his occupation which, judging by the ink on his fingers, is likely clerk or failed poet. He tips his hat and mumbles, "Mind the step, it's a slipper." You nod solemnly. The step is indeed a slipper. Outside, the fog has lessened, but only slightly. You can now see a good 3 meters ahead before the world dissolves into gauze. You squint to orient yourself. It's time to walk. But walking in Victorian London isn't just transportation, it's a full-body obstacle course. The cobblestones are your first enemy. Uneven, greasy with the residue of horses and weather, they make every step a gamble. Your boots weren't designed for this terrain. No one's are. You spot a woman ahead of you walking with a practiced tilt, one shoulder forward, arms slightly out for balance, as if constantly ready to dive sideways into a passing doorway. Then come the puddles. Deep, mysterious, and often deceivingly shallow-looking, these liquid traps are formed by a combination of rain, gutter runoff, and the occasional dumped chamber pot. You quickly learn the local technique. Step lightly, and if in doubt, follow a child. They know where the stones are safe. The smells are layered. First, the ever-present coal smoke, rich, bitter, almost oily. Then comes the stench of the Thames, even several streets away. At low tide, it reveals secrets no one wants. Add in the perfume of unwashed bodies, boiling tripe, stale ale, and the odd splash of perfume from someone with aspirations, and your nose gives up entirely. Still, you walk on. The streets are alive with motion. A knife grinder pedals by with a wheel strapped to a cart. A street preacher stands on a box, decrying sin and gesturing wildly with a tattered Bible. Children dash past in packs, some selling newspapers, others engaged in mysterious games that mostly involve shouting. One yells "Oi!" and points at your boots, but by the time you look down, he's vanished. Probably a compliment. You pass a crossing sweeper, an elderly man with a broom and a small tin cup. He gestures at the path he's just cleared of muck and filth, then rattles the cup expectantly. You toss in a halfpenny and he nods. Survival tip: always carry change, and always tip the people who keep you from falling face first into horse manure. Historians still argue whether crossing sweepers were the earliest form of urban sanitation or simply entrepreneurial children with strong stomachs. Either way, they're essential. At the corner of a main road, you encounter your first true traffic snarl. Carriages clatter past in all directions. A coal wagon loses a wheel, which nobody seems to notice. A man in a bowler hat is yelling at a goat, which appears to be his own. The fog thickens slightly, enough to make silhouettes loom larger than life. There are no traffic signals, no pedestrian rights, just a chaotic ballet of people trusting that the other party doesn't want a lawsuit, or at least not today. You wait for a gap, then scurry across with all the grace of a startled duck. A woman pushing a handcart nearly takes your knee out. She doesn't apologize, and neither do you. That's city etiquette. By mid-morning, your legs ache from the constant balancing act. You've avoided 2 near collisions, 3 mystery puddles, and what might have been a very determined goose. You find yourself on a quieter street at last, with fewer carts and more chimneys. You pause to catch your breath. On a nearby stoop, an old man polishes his boots with spit and a scrap of cloth. He looks up and says, "Ain't much fog today." You nod, unsure whether he's being ironic. He continues, "Could see the dome of St. Paul's for half a minute this morning. Practically tropical." You smile and move on. This is survival in Victorian London, one cautious, slippery step at a time. Your stomach growls, and that's how you know it's time to check into your new lodgings properly. Above a pie shop had sounded vaguely cozy when your cousin wrote it in his barely legible postcard. Now, as you step into the warm, meaty air of Mrs. Griggs' pies and savories, you realize just how complicated the word cozy can be in this city. The shop is dimly lit, with one flickering gas sconce and a coal stove that radiates enough heat to melt a small cannonball. Behind the counter, Mrs. Griggs herself, short, barrel-shaped, and armed with tongs, eyeballs you like she's deciding whether you're pie-worthy. "Meat or surprise?" she asks. You blink. "Surprise?" "Good choice," she says, and wraps something steaming into newspaper. She takes your penny, presses the parcel into your hands, and turns back to stirring a vat of something suspiciously gray. You unwrap the pie as you climb the stairs. It's meaty, vaguely, possibly beef, could be pigeon. You take a bite. It's hot, salty, and oddly sweet at the same time. It sticks to the roof of your mouth and your teeth feel like they've aged 5 years. Still, it's warm and it's food, and that's enough. Your room, as remembered, leans slightly to the left. It smells like old socks and maybe turnips. You've brought no decor, no rug, no books. Just your bag, your hat, and an oddly comforting sense of having survived your first full night. You spend the next hour trying to arrange your space into something habitable. The chamber pot is, thankfully, clean. There's a cracked mirror nailed to the wall at chin height. You test the bed springs again, still holding, though they groan like a ship in stormy seas. Then comes the sound, thunk, 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 thunk. Someone is knocking, no, tapping on your window from outside. You freeze. 3 floors up. Who's out there? You peer through the filthy glass and see nothing but fog and the shadow of a chimney. Probably a bird. Probably. Thunk. You fling the window open. Silence. Then a voice from below. "Oi, keep it down, some of us is sleeping." Fair enough. Later, you explore the hallway and discover a shared sitting room, which is just a space with 2 mismatched chairs and an oil lamp. One of your fellow lodgers, a thin woman in too many shawls, is staring out the window muttering about letters that never came. You sit in the other chair and pretend to read a book you don't have. Eventually she turns to you and whispers, "You the new one?" You nod. You're above the pie oven. Room stays warm, but the wallpaper'll peel in a week. She offers no further comment and resumes her vigil. At dinner, you return to the shop for something less surprising. This time it's eel pie, which at least has the decency to tell you up front what it is. You're halfway through when the door opens and a man in a stovepipe hat storms in, trailed by what might be a police constable or a very determined actor. They argue briefly about debt, or perhaps a missing goose. Mrs. Griggs doesn't look up. Victorian lodging life, you realize, is less about rest and more about endurance. You learn to sleep with one ear open, to ignore the wallpaper's slow collapse, and to accept that some of the smells might be permanent. Still, there's a certain charm. You fall asleep to the sound of rain on the window, the comforting clatter of hooves below, and the not-so-comforting creak of someone, moving on the floor above. But hey, you've got a roof, a room, and a full stomach. That's survival, Victorian style. The sun rises reluctantly, as if it too doesn't really want to be in Victorian London this morning. Pale rays of light poke through the fog, bouncing gloomily off soot-covered walls and damp cobblestones. Your room smells even more strongly of baked meat and shoe polish than yesterday. This is not the fault of your hygiene, though the bathing situation is, to put it kindly, an adventure. You wake hungry again, and that's a problem, because breakfast in your price range comes in only two forms, tragic and theatrical. You descend the stairs into Mrs. Griggs' shop and find her wiping a ladle with what appears to be a curtain. She offers you two options: beef drippings tea or cold mutton spread on bread. You go with the drippings, which is less a beverage and more a challenge. It's warm, oily, and surprisingly filling. Your stomach gurgles with confusion but not protest. You've survived worse. Upstairs, one of the other lodgers, the poet clerk with the ink-stained hands, invites you to sit with him in the common room. He's cradling a tin mug of something smoky and slightly purple. "Morning brew," he says proudly. "Bit of chicory, bit of burnt toast water." You nod politely and pretend not to smell what you think is a pickled egg in his coat pocket. Meals in Victorian London, you begin to realize, are more about energy conservation than enjoyment. Most people eat to fuel themselves through soot and survival, not for pleasure. The wealthy, of course, dine on oysters, partridge, and exotic fruits imported from colonies you've never heard of. The rest eat what's available: yesterday's offcuts, potatoes boiled into surrender, and stale bread softened with lard or ale. Mrs. Griggs' establishment, however, is in the middle zone. Not quite squalid, not quite respectable. This morning, a delivery boy arrives with a sack labeled pressed meat misc. You don't ask. To balance things out, you decide to visit a street market. There's one on Leather Lane, and the name alone makes you feel both nervous and intrigued. The market is an overwhelming sensory experience. Vendors shout about fresh kippers while someone plays a hurdy-gurdy 2 stalls down. A woman is selling what look like cinnamon buns but turn out to be turnip cakes. You watch a man flamboyantly toss a cabbage into the air, catch it on a cleaver, and shout, "Tuppence for green with personality." You buy a slice of toasted bread, slathered in beef fat and mustard. It crunches like a roof tile but tastes oddly nostalgic, even though you've never had it before. A small dog eyes you the entire time, just in case you drop some. Overhead, the fog briefly clears enough for you to glimpse the rooftops, rows of chimney pots, most still smoking. It's a sky of brick and soot. The bread turns to paste in your mouth, and you almost forget you're standing beside a pile of eel heads. You're learning quickly. Food is fast, functional, and rarely beautiful. Street vendors sell hot potatoes wrapped in yesterday's news. Boys carry trays of shriveled apples, shouting about their medicinal powers. And everywhere, there's tea, usually weak, often lukewarm, occasionally floral. You buy a cup from a woman selling it from a cart with a tiny brass kettle balanced over a charcoal flame. She hands it to you with a look that says, "Don't ask what's in it." You take a sip. It's mostly water, but hints at leaves and something smoky. Comfort in a cup. You walk back slowly, the tea warming your hands, your stomach full-ish, your brain buzzing slightly from the mustard. You pass a baker's window where tiny boys stare hungrily at buns they can't afford. One makes eye contact with you, then mimics eating a whole loaf dramatically before laughing and running off. You smile. Surviving breakfast in this city is an accomplishment. Doing it with a little humor, that's rare. Back in your room, you sit on the bed and let your stomach settle. Through the thin walls, you hear someone softly humming a hymn. Outside, a vendor yells, "Smoked herring best in Clerkenwell." You wouldn't dare test that claim. But for now you're fed, kind of. That's enough. Bathing in Victorian London is not so much a matter of hygiene as it is a complicated dance of class, luck, and fortitude. Your second morning here begins with the sudden realization that your armpits smell like boiled cabbage and your socks are threatening to rebel. It's time to take the plunge, or at least splash around in the general vicinity of one. The trouble is, baths are not everyday affairs for most Londoners in your bracket. If you're not rich, you're either bathing in a tin tub borrowed from under the stairs, or you're heading to one of the public bathhouses, which range from respectably grungy to you may contract an entirely new disease here. You choose the bathhouse. There's one a few streets away, the Sudbury Street Public Baths and Wash House, tucked behind a bakery and beside a chimney that never stops puffing. You approach the grimy entrance with the solemnity of a pilgrim. Inside the bathhouse is a curious blend of steam, mildew, and militaristic order. A woman with a ledger and a pencil stub eyes you as you step in. "First time?" she asks. You nod. "We've got half-hour slots. Soap is extra. Towel is extra. Hot water is an extra. You want the Tuesday special?" You hesitate. "What's the special?" She taps the ledger. "Lukewarm water, 1 sliver of soap, and a curtain that mostly works." You accept. The bathing room itself is a cubicle with a tin tub already half filled with slightly warm, slightly cloudy water. There's a tiny window near the ceiling that lets in a line of yellow fog. The sliver of soap is roughly the size of an acorn. Still, it's more luxury than you've had all week. You strip with the enthusiasm of someone preparing for battle, then lower yourself into the water. It bites at your skin at first, more from the memory of heat than actual temperature. But you adapt. The soap is slippery and rebellious. It lathers only under threat. You wash quickly. Face, pits, feet. The tub sloshes indignantly with every movement. From the other side of the partition, you hear a man humming something that might be a sea shanty or just his teeth chattering. Historians still argue whether Victorians were truly dirtier than earlier eras or simply more honest about it. What's certain is that cleanliness was a public performance as much as a private preference. Rich households paraded their copper bathtubs and porcelain basins like trophies. The working class, they had the flannel system, which was code for a hopeful rag and a lot of sighing. Some families bathed once a week, usually on Saturdays, to be clean for church. Others shared the same water in order of seniority. Father first, baby last. That saying, "Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater," not just a metaphor. You scrub at your toes and try not to think too hard about what floated through the tub before you got here. Once done, you dry off with a towel that smells like many previous users and get dressed in your slightly cleaner clothes. Your shirt now feels faintly lemon-scented, whether from soap or shared optimism. You're unsure. As you leave the bathhouse, you notice a sign near the door. Steam room available, additional penny, eucalyptus optional. You almost turn back, but no, you've survived. That's enough for one day. Back at Mrs. Griggs' lodging house, your fellow lodgers notice your slightly damp hair and elevated posture. "You look," the poet clerk says, squinting, "less grimy." "Don't get used to it," mutters the shawled woman, who's now knitting something the color of fog. You return to your room. Light your stub of candle and sit beside the window. Outside, the city continues its slow, gritty spin. You may be only marginally cleaner, but you feel triumphant. You've bathed, you've survived the soap, and that, in Victorian London, makes you practically royalty. Getting around Victorian London is an art form, a delicate balance between patience, bravery, and a sturdy digestive system. You can't simply summon a carriage by tapping a glowing screen. No, here, travel is a physical negotiation with creatures, cold, and the chaos of an unregulated city. Today, you decide to explore farther afield. You've heard whispers of the British Museum, free to the public, full of strange wonders, and only a few miles away. But walking that far would mean battling soot storms, open drains, and unsolicited moral advice from street preachers. It's time to try the omnibuses. The omnibus is essentially a wooden box on wheels, pulled by a horse who has seen things and no longer fears death. You approach the nearest stop, a designated corner where several soot-covered people are already loitering, and do your best to look like someone who knows what they're doing. When the omnibus finally rumbles into view, it looks like a small shack on wheels. The driver, seated high above, wields the reins like he's taming a dragon. A conductor stands by the open door, shouting Bloomsbury, Charing Cross, last call. You climb aboard and pay your fare, 2p, into a tin box that jangles, suspiciously like it hasn't been emptied in weeks. You find a seat near the back, wedged between a man in a plaid coat who smells like fish and a woman carrying what appears to be a live duck in her shawl. She nods politely as the duck stares at you with quiet judgment. The ride begins, slowly. The horses pull with a weary determination, hooves clopping rhythmically as the wheels squeak and shudder. Every bump in the cobblestones transfers directly into your spine. The inside of the omnibus sways like a ship at sea. You grip the edge of your bench and try to appear unshaken. Outside, the fog thickens. You can barely make out the figures hurrying along the pavement, shopkeepers setting up displays, chimney sweeps haggling over brushes, errand boys darting between carriages like soot-streaked squirrels. Occasionally, a blast of coal smoke sneaks through the open door, making you cough and rethink your life choices. Historians still argue whether the Victorian omnibus was revolutionary or just a wheeled excuse to avoid walking through manure. Either way, it was the great equalizer. Middle-class clerks and grimy apprentices sitting elbow to elbow, sharing a ride and a general distrust of traffic. Speaking of traffic, it's chaos. Carriages overtake each other without warning. A milk cart loses a wheel and spills its contents across the street. A hansom cab cuts in dangerously close, prompting your driver to shout something unprintable and brandish his whip theatrically. You finally arrive near the museum, slightly shaken, slightly bruised, and deeply impressed that the duck remained composed the entire journey. Getting off the omnibus is a process. There's no graceful way to dismount a moving wooden box in a heavy coat. You leap with mild panic, stumble, recover, and pretend that was intentional. The duck lady nods again in approval. But today isn't just about the museum. You've decided to investigate all the transportation options this great, grimy city has to offer. So next, you try a tram, an early one, powered by horses and running along metal rails embedded in the street. It's slightly smoother than the omnibus, but somehow louder. Sparks fly when the wheels hit a nail, and everyone jerks forward when the driver pulls too hard on the reins. The tram stops unceremoniously in front of a pub. You take that as a sign and hop off. After lunch, questionable sausage and a pint that tastes oddly of pickles, you wander toward the river. That's where you see the ultimate test of travel, the Thames waterman. For a few pence, You can be rowed across the river in a small boat by a man whose arms are made entirely of rope and curses. You nod, climb in, and hold on. The river is thick, brown, and smells like someone's lost dinner. Your waterman rows with steady fury, ignoring the larger boats and the floating debris. Halfway across, he spits into the water and mutters, "Cleaner now than last week." You don't ask. You reach the other side, damp but unharmed, and hand him a coin. He squints at it, bites it, then grunts in approval. Transaction complete. Back on land, you pause to admire the sheer range of ways Londoners get from point A to point B. Carts, cabs, omnibuses, trams, boats, and their own weary feet. You've survived them all today. As you walk back to your lodging house, your bones jostled, and your lungs full of industrial seasoning, you feel oddly proud. You're becoming a Londoner, not by blood but by bruise. You wake early, jolted not by the sound of an alarm clock, those are a luxury, but by a knock at the door and the smell of phosphorus. Outside your room, someone shouts, "Matches, safe matches, 3 boxes a penny." You throw on your coat and peer down the stairwell. A girl, no more than 12, is standing at the threshold of Mrs. Grigg's pie shop, her soot-dark hair tied back with string. She wears a dress that's clearly seen too many owners and carries a wooden tray strapped to her chest, piled high with matchboxes and splinters. Meet one of London's match girls, or match sellers, as the authorities call them, though that title doesn't quite convey the reality. These children are the foot soldiers of the city's streets, hawking boxes of matches from sunrise to fogfall. Cheap, flammable, and soaked in white phosphorus, they're technically illegal now, but nobody seems to be enforcing it in this part of town. You follow her at a distance as she sets off down the street, calling out her wares with mechanical rhythm. Matches, 3 a penny, safe for your chimney, safe for your soul. You're curious, how does a girl her age survive this? At a crossroads, she ducks into an alley behind a bakery and settles onto a crate. You hesitate, then step closer and offer her a halfpenny for a box. She eyes you warily, then softens. "First box is always the best," she says, before me hands start shaking. You sit on a nearby stoop and unwrap the box. Inside are tiny wooden sticks, heads dipped in yellow-white sludge that smells faintly sweet and sinister. This is white phosphorus, cheap, effective, and incredibly dangerous. Exposure leads to phossy jaw, a condition where the jawbone decays, blackens, and rots right out of your mouth. "Used to work in the factory," she tells you, nodding at your look of alarm. "Bryant and May, till me teeth started glowin'." You pause, wait, glowing? She grins. "At night in the mirror, like a lantern, looked beautiful, it did." Historians still argue whether the factory girls knew the full dangers of phosphorus, or whether they simply had no other choice. Either way, the match industry chewed through its workers like kindling. The girl tells you she left the factory on her cousin's advice. She's only got the one jaw now, so I figured she knows things, and now walks the streets instead. It's cold, and the fog makes it hard to sell, but she keeps most of her teeth, and that's a win. She shares her breakfast, half a heel of bread and a piece of hard cheese wrapped in newspaper. You accept a nibble and hand back a scrip of jerky from your own pocket in exchange. Trade complete. You spend the rest of the morning shadowing her. At one point, a constable strolls past and scowls, but says nothing. At another, a gentleman in a bright waistcoat buys 3 boxes and tips her a shilling, then walks off muttering about the state of the empire. By midday, her tray is lighter, and her voice has dropped an octave. "What do you do?" she asks suddenly. "Writer," you say, though that's only technically true. She nods thoughtfully. "My brother tried that, ended up a gravedigger, good money but bad knees." As you part ways, she waves her last box at a cluster of passers-by. "Matches, light your stove, light your sins." You return to the lodging house with a new respect for the city's youngest workers. and the things they endure to avoid factories that glow in the dark. In your room, you place the matchbox on your windowsill, a small toxic souvenir. Victorian London, you're learning, doesn't just run on coal and commerce. It runs on children with lungs full of fog and fingers stained with fire. It's hard to say exactly what pulls you into the apothecary's shop. Maybe it's the faded sign that reads, Dr. Finch's Remedies, Tonics and Curiosities, hand-painted in ornate lettering with the kind of flourishes that suggest a serious mustache. Or maybe it's the promise of something warm and vaguely lemon-scented to soothe the throat you've been coughing through for days. Inside, the shop smells like licorice, dust, and something metallic. Glass jars line the walls in careful rows, some filled with herbs, others with powders in impossible shades of green, and a few with floating things that refuse to identify themselves. There's a bell above the door that jingles sharply as you enter, and from behind a velvet curtain emerges a man in a dark vest and fingerless gloves. He peers at you over tiny spectacles. Cough or heartbreak? He asks, already reaching for a bottle. You hesitate. Cough, probably, and curiosity. Excellent, he says, producing a bottle with a faded label, Dr. Finch's anti-fog elixir. Underneath, in smaller print, also effective against melancholy, insomnia, and disagreeable in-laws. Victorian medicine is not quite what you'd call regulated. The line between cure and catastrophe is razor thin, and many apothecaries straddle it with both flair and complete lack of accountability. Laudanum, essentially opium dissolved in alcohol, is available for a few pence and advertised as a cure for everything from stomach aches to existential dread. There's also chlorodyne, a concoction of morphine, cannabis, and chloroform. It's technically for diarrhea, but a spoonful can knock out an adult horse. The apothecary hands you a sample of the elixir in a shot glass. You sip. It tastes like burned orange peel and regret. Your eyes water, your lungs feel oddly clearer. Behind the counter, the shelves reveal even more dubious remedies. Electric nerve tonic, Mrs. Haversham's soothing syrup for babies, and the infamous violet mercury tincture, which supposedly improves complexion by slightly killing your skin. Historians still argue whether these products helped anyone or merely delayed the inevitable. But in an era before germ theory was fully accepted, people took what comfort they could, especially if it was heavily sweetened and made them feel funny. The apothecary notices your interest and offers a small tour. You follow him behind the curtain and into a back room crammed with more bottles, dried flowers, and an anatomical model that's been annotated in what might be Latin or aggressive shorthand. He explains that many of the herbs come from Covent Garden, though the more exotic ingredients, crocodile bile, powdered pearl, desiccated bat, are ordered through special arrangements. You don't ask for clarification. One shelf is devoted entirely to treatments for female ailments. These include calming powders, nerve tinctures, and womb alignment tonics, none of which inspire much confidence. He proudly shows you a jar labeled hysterical vinegar. You nod politely. Then there's the leech tank. Sitting on a low table, it's exactly what it sounds like. A glass container filled with water and several sluggish, bloated leeches. Used to draw out bad blood or reduce swelling, leeches are part of a broader belief in balance. Too much blood? Leeches. Too little energy? Quinine. Too many worries? Time for mercury. Victorians were equal parts hopeful and reckless when it came to medicine. A good cure should either make you sweat, hallucinate, or evacuate something, preferably all three. You purchase a small bottle of peppermint drops, harmless and pleasantly numbing, and thank the apothecary for his time. He hands you a flyer for a lecture he's giving next week on the invigorating effects of galvanic currents in the melancholy male. You make a non-committal noise and tuck it into your pocket. Back on the street, the cold air hits your lungs, which now smell faintly of cloves and mystery. You pass another apothecary with a sign advertising elixirs, tonics, eyebrow serums, but decide one brush with spontaneous mercury poisoning is enough for today. Later that evening, you sit by your candlelight and examine the peppermint drops. The label claims they'll soothe coughs, freshen breath, and clarify one's intentions. Not bad for 2 pence. You pop one in your mouth and let the menthol carry you into sleep, hoping the dreams will be less foggy than the streets outside. Night falls like a damp curtain in Victorian London, slow, heavy, and full of strange sounds. Your candle flickers in protest as you pull your coat tighter and step back onto the street. Tonight, you're not braving the fog for necessity. Tonight, you're after entertainment. Of course, entertainment is a relative term. You can't afford the opera or the West End stage, where top hats jostle for position and monocles glint with cultivated boredom. No, your kind of evening takes place in darker corners, cheaper, smellier, far more memorable. You begin with a penny gaff. Tucked into a narrow alley behind a greengrocer's, this makeshift theater is marked only by a red paper lantern and the sound of tinny music. You hand over a copper coin to a boy whose entire job is saying in or out, make up or mind. Inside, the room smells like burnt toast and armpit. Benches line the walls, and the tiny stage is barely large enough for one enthusiastic actor and a very nervous chicken. The show has already started. On stage, a man in a powdered wig and a patched frock coat performs a scene that may or may not be from Shakespeare. He's interrupted frequently by the audience, who seem to view the performance more as a suggestion than a script. A woman throws a cabbage. The actor bows anyway. You laugh despite yourself. The gaffe isn't just entertainment, it's survival. For a few brief minutes, everyone here forgets the chill, the hunger, and the smell of the river. Next, you head for a lecture. These are all the rage among the intellectually curious and the professionally nosy. Tonight's topic, the moral hygiene of the working man's sock. You don't know what it means, but it's warm inside, and the speaker has an impressive mustache. He paces the stage like a prophet, brandishing a pair of woolen socks and pointing dramatically at a chart. You learn that changing socks weekly is civilized, bi-weekly is continental, and anything longer is regrettably French. The crowd murmurs in agreement. Afterward, there's a short presentation by a woman billed as the Lady Mesmerist of Lambeth. She hypnotizes a shoemaker into clucking like a chicken. You begin to suspect the shoemaker is part of the act, but the audience gasps with genuine awe. Historians still argue whether these lectures were vehicles for education, flirtation, or low-budget performance art. Probably all three. Either way, you leave with a pamphlet in your pocket and the vague sense that your socks are judging you. It's nearly midnight, but you're not done. You pass a pub where the music spills out like gravy, thick, warm, and just a little off-key. Inside, a woman with a voice like sandpaper sings about sailors, broken hearts, and gin. Patrons raise their mugs in unison, sloshing ale onto the floor. You linger by the door just long enough to catch the chorus, then slip back into the street. A final stop, the Magic Lantern Show. Set up in the back room of a coffee house, the show consists of glass slides projected onto a bedsheet by a contraption that wheezes like a teapot having a panic attack. The images blur and jitter ghosts, biblical scenes, foreign animals. The audience gasps at each one as though the future has arrived. You sit near the back, the warmth from the lantern brushing your cheek. The man next to you mutters facts about each slide under his breath, whether accurate or not. That's a camel, 3 stomachs, eats cobblestones if startled, you nod solemnly. By the time you step back into the foggy street, the lamps are burning low, and the world feels quieter. A newspaper boy snores under a cart. A stray cat slinks across your path, pausing to look at you like it's seen your soul and found it slightly interesting. Back in your room, you sit in the dark and reflect. Entertainment in Victorian London isn't elegant or polished. It's loud, chaotic, occasionally lewd, and wonderfully alive. You've been shouted at by actors, lectured about socks, mesmerized by questionable science, and gently serenaded by a woman who might have mugged you in another life. You fall asleep to the fading notes of street music echoing through the walls, and for the first time in days, you dream of color instead of cold. Fog isn't just weather in Victorian London, it's a personality. It rolls in with the quiet authority of a dinner guest no one invited but everyone must tolerate. Some days it's faint and moody, hanging just above the rooftops. Other times it slithers into your coat collar and stays there like an unshakable curse. Today, the fog is thick enough to chew. You step outside and immediately lose sight of the opposite pavement. The gas lamps are tiny halos, barely illuminating the space around them. Everything else, buildings, carriages, even people, is swallowed into a damp golden blur. You wrap your scarf tight and start walking, slowly, one cautious step at a time. The city sounds different in this weather, muffled, distant. A carriage clatters by, then vanishes. A dog barks from nowhere. Somewhere a child is singing, and the melody curls in the mist like a lullaby from another planet. You stop at a street corner and find a man standing perfectly still. He's holding a cane, wearing an overcoat too clean for this part of town. His expression is unreadable. You nod. He doesn't move. Waiting for someone? You ask, unsure if he's alive or simply sculptural. He replies without turning his head. Not waiting, listening. You hear how the fog changes the bell from St. Giles. You pause. He's right. The usual crisp chime is now a low, rounded thud like a memory of a bell. He tips his hat and walks away, disappearing within 3 paces. Fog, you realize, isn't just a visual nuisance. It's social too. In this city, fog dictates behavior. It closes schools. It cancels mail. It transforms the world into a stage set for ghosts. Historians still argue whether the Great Smog of 1952 was a fluke or an inevitable outcome of industrialization. But even back in the 1800s, people knew something wasn't right. They blamed coal mostly, and foreigners naturally. It was said that the soot levels rose every time an Irish brickmaker sneezed or a German engineer took a walk. Some scientists warned about miasmas, bad air believed to cause everything from cholera to melancholia. Others argued the fog was harmless, just a cozy inconvenience. The truth, of course, lay somewhere in the coughing middle. You head toward the Thames, guided more by memory than sight. When you finally reach the embankment, the river is barely a whisper. Lamps flicker on the bridges like distant stars, and the water beneath looks like ink left to curdle. You pass a rag-and-bone man pushing a cart through the haze. He hums tunelessly, and the cart wheels squeak in rhythm. He tips his cap and vanishes into a nearby alley like a character from a dream you haven't had yet. At the corner of Blackfriars Road, you encounter 2 children selling bootlaces. They hold a single candle between them, its light a feeble protest. They call out to you, but their voices are strange, flattened and stretched by the fog. You buy a pair of laces, not because you need them, but because something about their silhouettes seems more real than anything else around you. Later that evening, you return to your lodging house. Mrs. Griggs is lighting extra lamps in the pie shop, muttering about customers wandering into fireplaces again. You nod sympathetically. In your room, the fog presses against the window like a curious cat. You open it a crack. The air tastes like ash and tea leaves. Downstairs, the poet clerk has written a new line. The fog knows my name and whispers it in soot. You tell him it's his best work yet. That night you dream of cities made entirely of fog, buildings, people, even food, all shifting, all uncertain, all strangely comforting. You walk those dream streets and feel at home. Because now you know, surviving Victorian London means surviving the fog, not just around you, but the fog inside you too. You wake scratching. Not dramatically, no theatrical flailing, but with the quiet, resigned scratching of someone who's just realized their sheets are not alone. You lie still, eyes wide open, and let the itch creep in like fog through a half-shut window. Welcome to Victorian hygiene. Downstairs, Mrs. Griggs is boiling laundry in an iron cauldron that doubles as a stew pot on Sundays. The smell is a blend of soap, lard, and last night's mystery pie. She spots you scratching your forearm and gives you a knowing look. Try camphor, she says, as if it's the solution to all life's problems. You nod. She thrusts a tiny tin into your hand. Inside, a greasy lump of something that smells like eucalyptus and furniture polish. Victorian London is at war with lice, fleas, bedbugs, and the general idea of cleanliness. You're learning that laundry is a privilege, not a routine. Water is hauled, heated, soaped, scrubbed, wrung, and dried all by hand, all under the optimistic assumption that today won't rain. Your shirt, you realize, hasn't been washed since, a while ago. You decide to pay a visit to a local laundress, a woman recommended by the shawled knitter downstairs, who called her reliable, if a bit blind. The laundress works out of a cellar on Turnip Lane. A wooden sign out front reads, "Washing, mending, and mild gossip, ask for Effie." You knock, and the door creaks open on its own. Inside, steam, damp clothes, and a woman who looks like she's been ironing since the dawn of time. She glances at your bundle, then at your face. "Don't need to say a word," she rasps. "That shirt's seen things." She takes your clothes, quotes a price, and hands you a receipt that's just a piece of chalk on slate. "Come back tomorrow," she says. "Unless it rains, then come Thursday or Friday, definitely before Tuesday fortnight." You thank her, leave your socks to fate, and step back into the street. Later that day, you visit a chemist to inquire about lice remedies. He offers you camphor again, sulfur soap, and a powder labeled for livestock and bachelors. You buy it. Desperation knows no pride. Back at the lodging house, you decide to address the mattress situation. You peel back the thin quilt and inspect the stuffing, straw, some cloth scraps, a button, one live beetle. You replace the quilt with a firm shake and decide not to think too hard about it. Victorian folks employed a variety of self-care hacks. Lavender sachets in pockets to mask odor, vinegar rinses for hair, a whole cottage industry of toilet waters, not for plumbing, but to dab behind your ears and pretend the world didn't smell like manure and burning coal. Your fellow lodgers share their own tips. The poet clerk swears by lemon peel rubbed under the arms. The shawled knitter confesses she sometimes wipes down with gin when spirits and soap are both in short supply. Historians still argue whether Victorian cleanliness was improving or merely evolving. The upper classes bathed more often, but only the wealthy had indoor plumbing. Everyone else made do with sponge baths, shared tubs, or a hopeful splash from the communal pump. At one point, you visit a local pump on a foggy corner. A woman with a baby fills a tin jug, nods at you, and says, "Good water, this one. Only one death this month." You nod back and resolve to boil yours twice. Back in your room, you sprinkle the bachelor powder into your sheets, scrub your scalp with sulfur soap, and burn a bit of camphor for good measure. It smells like burnt peppermint and anxiety, but the itching fades. You sleep that night in what might be your cleanest state since arriving. The air is still musty, and the fog still presses its damp nose to your window, but your skin no longer tingles with betrayal. And that's what passes for a win in this city. One scratch-free night, one half-clean shirt, one tiny victory in the war against grime. You've eaten pies of uncertain origin. You've drunk beef drippings disguised as tea, but nothing quite prepares you for the sheer emotional gamble of dining out in Victorian London. Today, you decide to treat yourself. You've avoided dysentery for over a week now. Surely that deserves a warm meal at an actual eating house. You pass a dozen contenders before settling on one that calls itself the Honest Spoon. The name inspires confidence, or at least fewer questions. A chalkboard out front lists the specials: stewed mutton, oyster pudding, cold tongue pie. You enter. The room smells of old gravy and desperation. A man in a bowler hat coughs meaningfully into his pint. A serving girl with a permanent frown slaps a menu onto your table. It's a scrap of newsprint with two choices circled in grease pencil. You point at the mutton. She nods, disappears, and reappears almost instantly with a plate that looks and smells like it has strong opinions. The meat is tender, if you squint at it the right way. The potatoes are a soft gray. The gravy oddly tastes like licorice. You eat carefully, employing the same strategy you'd use to cross a frozen river: slow steps, eyes open for danger. Dining out in Victorian London requires strategy. Avoid shellfish unless you're near the coast and can see the ocean with your own eyes. Oysters, once the food of the poor, are now suspect after the recent Times headline, "4 dead after discount mollusks." The upper classes are moving toward imported bananas. The rest stick with pies and hope for the best. You finish your meal with a cup of tea that might have been reheated 3 times. The saucer wobbles. You tip the girl a penny. She nods with the tired appreciation of someone who's dodged boiling lard before. You leave the Honest Spoon with a full stomach and a slightly nervous liver. Still peckish, you wander the streets in search of something lighter. You find a man selling roasted chestnuts from a cart shaped like a teapot. The chestnuts are warm, a little bitter, and charred in a good way. You stand there chewing and watching a man across the street attempt to eat a pickled egg while dodging a passing wagon. Later that evening, you pass a confectioner's shop. The windows are fogged with steam, but inside you see rows of sweets in glass jars: candied peel, barley sugar twists, and licorice shaped like tiny boots. You step in and buy a toffee for a halfpenny. The shopkeeper, a pink-faced woman with enormous sleeves, tells you, "This one's got treacle, clove, and just a kiss of laudanum." You pause. Joking, she adds. You think. Victorians had an interesting relationship with sweets. Sugar was cheap thanks to the empire's plantations, and children were often pacified with soothing syrups that contained questionable ingredients. Some treats were meant to freshen breath, others to harden teeth into gravel. Back at the lodging house, the poet clerk is chewing a hunk of what he claims is pine tar fudge. The shawled knitter is stirring something suspicious in a teacup and calls it me gruel. You politely decline. Mrs. Griggs offers you a slice of eel jelly. You very politely decline. You go to bed wondering what you've eaten, what you might regret, and whether treacle can be weaponized. Your stomach burbles a little, but mostly in approval. You've dined out, you've dined in, you've survived both. That's as close to luxury as it gets. And in the quiet, oily glow of your candle, you unwrap the toffee from earlier, pop it in your mouth, and let the sweetness carry you to sleep, one slightly sticky dream at a time. The trouble begins with a misunderstanding about soup. You're standing in line at a pie stall near Spitalfields Market, contemplating whether today's offering, mystery ragu with optional pickle, is worth the risk, when a constable taps you on the shoulder. He's tall, broad, and wears a helmet so polished you can see your own stunned reflection. "Evenin'. What's your name then?" You blink. A visitor." "That's so. Well, we've had reports of a troublemaker matchin' your description. Someone nicked a tin from Mr. Hockley's pudding stall, thought we'd have a word." And just like that, you're in the curious grip of Victorian justice. In truth, police in this era, colloquially known as bobbies, after Sir Robert Peel, are a relatively new invention. Less than 50 years old, the force is still figuring out how to manage a city filled with pickpockets, confidence tricksters, and chimney sweeps who disappear into roofs and never return. You're not arrested. Not exactly. You're escorted to the local watch house for questioning, which feels very much like being arrested, except there's more paperwork and less yelling. The constable walks briskly. You do your best to keep up. Inside the station, things are surprisingly calm. A drunk sings gently in a holding cell. A boy with a black eye is being handed a cup of something warm by a matron with the aura of a tired saint. The desk sergeant eyes you. "Soup thief." You open your mouth. The constable shrugs, probably not, but worth a check. The sergeant waves you off. "Right, next time you fancy soup, pay for it, or don't look so guilty." You're free to go, but you've learned something important. In Victorian London, your face is your passport, and sometimes it lies about your intentions. So, what should you say if you're actually arrested? First, don't lie. The courts here are like a dramatic uncle. They love stories, but they remember details. Stick to the truth, or at least a version that sounds truthful while being vague. Second, know your vocabulary. You're not loitering, you're awaiting instruction. You didn't steal, you reallocated unattended goods. And if anyone asks, you travel under modest means, not live above a pie shop. Third, be polite, but not too polite. Over-eagerness smells like guilt. If you must bribe someone, do it with food, not coins. A well-timed sausage roll has turned more than one magistrate's frown upside down. Back on the street, you encounter another constable, this one younger, red-faced, clearly new. He stops you. "Evenin'," he says nervously, "we've had, an incident." You blink again. "I assure you, I haven't touched anyone's pudding." He looks confused. No lost goat." You glance around. Sure enough, a small crowd is chasing something furry and determined across the cobblestones. You give the constable a friendly nod and walk briskly in the opposite direction. Victorian law enforcement is a blend of growing bureaucracy and sheer improvisation. Some officers carry truncheons and whistles. Others rely on community rumor. Most are underpaid, undertrained, and overwhelmed. Historians still argue whether the presence of police actually made the streets safer or merely gave the illusion of order. What's certain is that people quickly learn to blend, duck, and speak with the tone of someone who definitely hasn't stolen anything today. You return to your lodging house with a newfound respect for caution. The poet clerk greets you with, "You smell like a watch house," and offers you a biscuit as consolation. You accept. Later that night, you jot down a list in your notebook, things not to do when approached by a bobby. 1. Panic. 2. Mention soup. 3. Reference pudding. You sleep with your boots near the door, just in case. And when the fog rolls in again, you feel just a little more invisible, just enough to stay out of trouble. Night doesn't fall in Victorian London. It settles, slowly and thickly, like soot drifting down onto a table you'll never quite get clean. The gas lamps flicker to life one by one, casting golden halos that do little to pierce the fog. You've come to know this hour well, the in-between, when honest people hurry home and the city begins to murmur its secrets. Back in your room above Mrs. Grigg's pie shop, the walls groan softly as they expand with the day's remaining heat. You light a stub of candle and sit by the window, listening. The first sound is hooves, always hooves. Horses clatter by in every direction, cabs, carts, delivery wagons. You've begun to distinguish the rhythms. A cab moves in a confident clop-clop pause pattern. A milk cart wobbles more unevenly. Occasionally, a riderless horse barrels past with a theatrical urgency that suggests a plot twist somewhere nearby. Next comes the laughter, often sudden, sharp, echoing off brick. Pub-goers spill into the streets with cheeks full of gin and songs only half remembered. A man stumbles past your building singing "The Minstrel Boy" in a key previously unknown to music theory. Then the vendors arrive. Yes, at night. Some hawk roasted chestnuts. Others whisper about medicinal tonics and evening elixirs that cure both toothaches and loneliness. One man carries a sack of dolls and mutters, "For her dreams, keep away spirits." You politely close the window. And yet, not all noises are so human. Somewhere down the street, a cat yowls like it's arguing with the moon. Rats scurry along gutters with tiny feet that somehow sound louder than your own heartbeat. A church bell chimes the hour, dull and smudged by fog. It sounds more like a warning than a welcome. At times, the silence itself becomes a character. It stretches between footsteps. It lingers after a carriage rolls past. In that space, you hear your own breath and the creak of your bed frame, and maybe, just maybe, the low, droning hum of something very old and very tired. That's when the foghorn begins. It moans from the direction of the river, low, mournful, as if the Thames itself is sighing. It vibrates in your chest, like the city clearing its throat in the dark. You shiver slightly, even under your blanket. The foghorn doesn't just warn ships, it warns you too. Stay inside, let the night do its work. Historians still argue whether the soundscape of Victorian London was truly more chaotic than today's cities or simply different. The mix of mechanical and organic noise, the hiss of steam, the bray of donkeys, the slap of wooden wheels was constant, and yet for all its clamor, it had a rhythm, a grimy sort of music. You hear a sudden metallic clang from the alley. You freeze. A beat later, a voice mutters, "Just the bin again," and you relax. Another clang, then laughter. False alarm. You blow out the candle and crawl into bed, letting the patchy quilt hug you like an overenthusiastic cat. But you don't sleep, not yet. The city still has stories to tell. You listen for the last sound of the night, the whistle. Short and sharp, it cuts through everything else. A constable on his rounds, signaling the all clear or perhaps calling for help. The sound comes again, farther off now. You let your body sink deeper into the mattress. Your thoughts slow. The foghorn sighs again. And in this darkness, amidst hoofbeats, whispers, and that long, low moan of the river's breath, you finally drift off. The city doesn't sleep, but you do, somehow. Victorian London is not built for women, it's built around them, over them, despite them. The city makes them invisible, unless they're causing trouble or wearing particularly memorable hats. Today, as the fog thins just enough to resemble weather instead of personality, you decide to pay attention to the women around you, the ones surviving in corsets, petticoats, and 1,000 unwritten rules. You start with the shawled knitter in your lodging house. You've never caught her name, everyone just calls her Miss T. She's perched in her usual seat near the window, wool looping deftly through her fingers. Today, though, she's not knitting, she's writing. You glance at the paper. It's a letter, carefully scripted, addressed to no one, just a name, to the editor. "What are you writing?" you ask. She doesn't look up. A complaint or a compliment, I haven't decided yet. You nod and leave her to it. Out on the street, you observe the morning tide of women navigating the city. Their clothes are statements of status, but also of survival. Each layer serves a purpose: modesty, protection, insulation, concealment. You spot a maid balancing a basket of laundry with one hand while ushering a child along with the other. A flower seller calls out from behind her cart, cheeks red from cold, fingers blue from hours outside. A governess, neatly dressed but never mistaken for wealthy, ushers her charge through the fog like a ship's captain guiding a dinghy through stormy seas. You follow the sounds of chatter to a tea stall, where 3 women are already gathered around chipped mugs. You buy a weak cup and linger at the edge. They don't stop talking. They simply absorb you. She fainted right into the piano, one says, right in the middle of God Save the Queen. She wasn't faintin'. She was dodgin' a marriage proposal, says another. Smart girl, the third adds. They all nod, sip, and carry on. Victorian women faint often, at least according to the fiction of the time. But in reality, fainting is a luxury. Most women you've encountered are too busy carrying laundry, dodging carts, or keeping their families fed to have time for dramatic collapses. Still, the fainting couch remains an iconic fixture, nestled in parlors like elegant warning signs. Back at your lodging, Miss T is boiling water on the stove, humming a tune that sounds suspiciously like a military march. You ask if she ever wears a corset. Of course, she says, keeps the spine straight, keeps men guessing, makes you harder to pickpocket. She smiles at your look of surprise. Corsets, as you learn, are not instruments of torture, not always. For many, they're tools of identity, armor, or even comfort. A well-made corset supports. A poorly made one suffocates. Most women know the difference. You borrow a copy of The Lady's Own Companion from the communal bookshelf and flip through the advice columns. They are intense. How to avoid hysteria while entertaining your husband's vicar. Is my sigh too forward? An acceptable level of weeping. You return the book to its shelf with a whispered apology. Later that day, you attend a lecture at the Mechanics' Institute, not because it's aimed at you, but because the topic is the proper training of the female mind, and curiosity trumps self-preservation. The speaker is a man whose mustache appears to be doing most of the talking. He uses phrases like fragile intellect and delicate constitution, while mispronouncing half of what's on his own slides. The audience, mostly women, sit silently, until the final question. Miss T stands. Sir, she says sweetly, if women are so mentally unfit for logic, why did your wife correct you on the 3rd slide? The room explodes into laughter. The speaker, flustered, mumbles something about emotional distractions and retires to his notes. You and Miss T walk home together, fog swirling at your ankles. She says, I'm old enough to know better and too tired to pretend. You believe her. That night, you hang your coat beside your bed and study the seams. 2 hidden pockets, 1 sewn patch, signs of habit and adaptation. Being a woman in Victorian London means knowing how to hide things, money, thoughts, opinions, and when to let them blaze like gaslight. You fall asleep thinking not of queens and fainting spells, but of shawls, satire, and silent rebellion stitched into every hem. Morning light filters through your soot-smeared window like tea through an old sock. You stretch, cough once, always, and sit up with the growing awareness that your funds are dwindling. Sooner or later, you're going to need to work. But what job could you possibly do in Victorian London, with lungs full of fog and a skill set mostly involving sarcasm and not dying? Downstairs, the poet clerk is reading a broadsheet. Plenty of work, he says, not looking up. If you've got strong legs, a weak will, or don't mind rats. Encouraging. You take his paper and scan the listings. There are ads for dock workers, coal porters, matchbox assemblers, and several mysterious positions involving discretion and sturdy gloves. One post simply reads, Boy Wanted. No questions. You decide not to pursue that one. Your first attempt is at a print shop. You wander in, blinking through the haze of ink and linseed oil, and ask if they need help. "You can read?" the owner asks, looking skeptical. You nod. "You can spell?" "Usually." He thinks it over. "Can you lift a full crate of type blocks?" You glance at the crate. It looks like it eats gym memberships for breakfast. You say nothing. "Didn't think so," he mutters and turns back to his press. You leave with dignity mostly intact and soot entirely intact. Next, you try the post office. The line is long. The air smells like glue and mild panic. By the time you reach the counter, the clerk sighs. "We're full up," she says, "unless you're handy with a bicycle and don't mind dogs." You point to your shoes. "Do these scream agility?" She smirks. "They scream, try the workhouse." Historians still argue whether the workhouses were necessary evils or just unnecessarily evil. Meant to provide shelter and employment to the poor, they were infamous for harsh conditions, monotonous meals, and rules that made military barracks look like luxury spas. Many would rather starve than submit to the soul-flattening regimens of scrubbing, stitching, and silence. You move on. Eventually, you find a sign near Covent Garden. "Copyist needed, fast hand, slow opinions." This sounds promising. You knock on the door of a small publishing office. A man with ink-stained fingers leads you inside, sits you at a desk, and hands you a sheaf of smudged paper. "Copy this exactly," he says. "No improvements, no sighing." You begin. The work is tedious but doable. It involves a lot of "to whom it may concern" and "dear esteemed sirs." You write until your fingers cramp and your candle shortens to a stub. At the end of the shift, you hand over your pages. "Passable," the man grunts. He gives you a shilling and a biscuit that's harder than most building materials. "Come back tomorrow." And just like that, you're employed, marginally, temporarily. You celebrate with a cheap ale and a dinner of questionable stew, which turns out to contain at least one vegetable. You make a mental note. This is the highest point of the week so far. Your fellow lodgers are supportive in their own way. Miss T nods approvingly. The poet clerk grumbles that the literary world's gone to the dogs. Mrs. Griggs offers you a free second helping of crust. You retire to your room proud, tired, and still a little itchy. But now, the city feels slightly less hostile. You're not just surviving it, you're working in it. Even if that work is mostly transcribing letters no one reads and dodging ink blotches like landmines. As you drift off to sleep, you hear the distant clatter of hooves and the echo of a man shouting, "Wanted, clean hands and low standards." You smile. You're halfway qualified. It begins with a knock. Not the polite kind, the kind of knock that sounds like someone's trying to remind the door who's boss. You open it cautiously to find your landlord, Mr. Dreck, with a ledger under one arm, and a scowl so deep it might qualify as archaeological. His coat smells like wet wool and unresolved family arguments. He eyes your boots, your walls, your life choices. "Rent's due," he growls. 3 days ago, if we're being honest, which I always am." You nod and mutter something about being paid tomorrow. He doesn't blink. "Tomorrow then, or the chimney flue gets sealed and you'll be warm the hard way." You close the door, sigh, it's official, your landlord hates you. Living under Victorian tenancy is a constant negotiation between discomfort and fear. You pay for space, not silence. Warmth is extra. Privacy is imaginary. Mr. Dreck owns the building, the coal supply, and technically the windows, though you're pretty sure he hasn't looked through one since 1847. He appears at odd hours, measuring things with a rusty ruler, muttering about wear and tear, and sniffing suspiciously at any scent that might suggest you've been cooking. Historians still argue whether Victorian landlords were uniformly villainous or merely stressed men in tall hats. But among tenants, the image is clear. tyrants with ledgers and no concept of mold. Later that day, you try to patch the window again. The pane rattles in its frame, letting in both fog and judgment. You use the last of your wax paper and some string. It holds just. In the hallway, you overhear Mr. Drek arguing with Miss T. She stands firm, hands on hips, wielding a rolled-up magazine like a sword. "This wallpaper's been peeling since the Jubilee," she says, "and if you think I'll pay for the privilege of watching it fall, you're mad." Mr. Drek grumbles something about female hysteria and stomps off. She wins. There are rumors he's planning rent increases. The poet clerk suggests forming a tenants' league. Mrs. Griggs offers to poison his tea in a metaphorical sense. You all nod solemnly. That evening, the coal delivery is mysteriously short. You suspect Drek is adjusting for usage. You light a candle and huddle in your coat. You decide to explore other lodgings just in case. A walk through the neighborhood reveals your options. One house advertises rooms with river view, which turns out to mean smells like fish. Another lists modern plumbing, but the plumbing is outside and modern for 1702. A third offers daily breakfast, which turns out to be water and the memory of toast. You return to your crooked room with renewed appreciation. It's miserable, yes, but you're miserable. You pay Drek the next morning. He counts your shillings twice, then grunts, "Try not to damage the floor with your walking." The poet clerk hands you a small drawing later, a caricature of Drek holding a tiny umbrella under a leaking ceiling. Title, "The Drip and the Damp." You laugh and pin it to the wall. Victorian tenancy isn't about comfort. It's about resilience. You learn to heat water on a candle, dry socks near a stove, and line your windows with newspaper. You swap tips with lodgers like secret recipes. And slowly you understand, the landlord may own the building, but the tenants own the stories. The next morning arrives with an odd brightness filtered through layers of soot and fog, yes, but brightness nonetheless. A trick of the weather, the kind that makes Londoners suspicious. You step outside and squint at the sky, which appears pale blue. "Bad omen," mutters the flower seller down the road. "Means we'll have snow or politics." Weather in Victorian London is rarely neutral. It's emotional, philosophical even. Rain isn't just precipitation, it's foreshadowing. Fog isn't just damp, it's character development. You stop at a paper stall and glance at the broadsheets. Headlines argue about the current cold snap, blaming everything from gas prices to imported sheep. One writer even suggests it's the fault of the increasing prevalence of cheap umbrellas and low morals. You chuckle, but the truth is, weather dictates everything in this city: moods, meals, mobility, even mortality. Too much fog and the streets become a labyrinth. Too little and everyone suspects something's coming. You meet Miss T outside the pie shop, wrapped in no fewer than 5 layers and carrying an umbrella that doubles as a walking stick. "They say the weather's shifting," she says. "London's overdue for a good freeze or a terrible thaw." You nod sagely, unsure what either means. As you walk together toward the market, the conversation turns to superstitions. This is where things get interesting. Victorians love weather theories. Not science necessarily, but theories. The idea that fog is caused by sinful behavior, that a sudden wind from the east means someone's about to elope, that if your cat washes behind its ears twice, expect hail and heartbreak. Rain on washing day means a letter's coming, says Miss T. From whom? Doesn't matter, could be a bill. The market's abuzz with similar chatter. A butcher tells you he's expecting snow because the milk's curdled funny. A chimney sweep says the ash has gone soft, storms in the bones. You buy an apple and bite into it thoughtfully. It tastes suspiciously of coal, but you nod anyway. Historians still argue whether Victorian meteorology was based more on folk wisdom than observable patterns. What's certain is that weather was less a topic and more a narrative. Every fog had a story. Every breeze carried meaning. Barometers were sold alongside tea kettles and Bibles. Later, you visit a small bookstore near Clerkenwell, where a lecturer is speaking about climatic melancholia, the theory that certain people are more sensitive to weather shifts. He refers to it as the mood of the barometer. A woman in the front row bursts into tears when he mentions unseasonable warmth. You slip out quietly. Back in your room, the walls sweat slightly from the sudden change in temperature. Your boots, once rigid with cold, now feel strangely spongy. You light a candle, not for warmth, but to mark the passage of time. That night, the fog returns, not thick but persistent. You sit by the window, watching it curl around the lampposts. You wonder if it's changed you. You've grown superstitious. You listen to rain like it's trying to tell you something. You read your own breath in the cold like tea leaves. The wind taps the glass just once. You pause. Then again. Miss T was right. The weather here isn't just weather, it's London speaking. You give up. The soot wins. After weeks of wiping, brushing, dabbing, and politely ignoring, you finally accept that every item you own is now vaguely gray. Your boots have surrendered their shine. Your scarf has developed a stripe pattern that wasn't part of the design. Even your fingernails, scrubbed daily with vinegar and determination, remain softly shadowed like charcoal sketches of cleaner days. And yet, you find yourself oddly attached to it. This morning you're brushing ash from your windowsill when you realize you're humming. Not a sad tune, not an I miss soap tune, an actual, almost jaunty melody. Could it be, have you made peace with the grime? You lean out and inhale. The air smells like burnt toast and iron with a hint of horse. You don't flinch. Downstairs, the poet clerk grins at you as you enter the common room. You've got the look, he says. What look? The London look. You glance in the mirror. Your cheeks are wind-chapped, your hair perpetually flattened by fog, and your coat wears its soot like embroidery. You nod. He's right. There's a point in every survivor's journey where resistance gives way to adaptation. You begin walking with the tilt that dodges wind. You learn the shortcut that avoids puddles. You step over coal scabs without a second thought. Mrs. Griggs offers you a cup of tea and doesn't bother wiping the rim. You drink it anyway. You thank her. This is growth. That afternoon, you run into the duck-carrying woman from your first omnibus ride. Her duck, somehow larger now, quacks judgmentally. You're still alive, she says. Well done. Barely, you reply. That's how we do it. Historians might never capture this strange affection for the city's dirt. They write about fog as metaphor and pollution as scandal, but they often miss the quiet truth. London's grime becomes part of you, a shared burden, a badge of place. At the market, a vendor hands you a baked potato through a gloved hand and says, "Bit of coal dust keeps the lungs strong." You don't correct him. You just blow on it gently and take a bite. Miss T gives you a lavender sachet for the illusion of cleanliness. You place it in your pocket like a good luck charm. Its faint floral scent mixes with your well-earned musk. That evening, you return home and light your candle. The flickering glow makes the soot on your walls look almost artistic. You settle into your rickety chair and jot down a line. The city clings to you in fingerprints and fog. You sleep better than usual. Maybe it's not resignation. Maybe it's transformation. Maybe grime is a kind of acceptance. Your final morning in Victorian London arrives not with fanfare, but with the soft rustle of paper-thin curtains and the familiar groan of wood expanding in damp air. You lie in bed a moment longer than usual, tracing your gaze across the ceiling crack that's begun to resemble a map of Scotland. You feel different, not cleaner, certainly, not richer but steadier, softer around the edges, smoothed perhaps by fog. You rise, pack your few things. Your scarf now holds the precise folds of a seasoned Londoner. Your boots carry a city's worth of dust. You pause to tuck Miss T's sachet in your coat pocket, still faintly floral. Downstairs, Mrs. Griggs hands you a goodbye parcel. A cold pie, a square of paper-wrapped cheese, and a note that simply reads, "You didn't complain." That's rare. It feels like a medal. The poet clerk is writing a sonnet about shoes. You don't ask. He nods at you. If you come back, he says, bring stories, but not too good. We're suspicious of too much joy. The air outside is just as you remember, damp, gray, and completely yours now. The fog is back, but you no longer resent it. It's familiar, almost affectionate. You take one last walk through the streets, past the match girls and the pie carts, the cat who haunts the lamppost on Cocross Street, and the woman who sells dubious liniments in front of the haberdashery. They've all become landmarks. You pass the apothecary, who once dosed you with regret-flavored cough syrup. He waves, holding a new bottle labeled Tonic for Realists. You stop at the market, buy a small red apple from the old man with the unpredictable beard. Last one of the season, he says, like a prophecy. You nod, take a bite, and continue walking. At the river, the foghorn sounds one long, low breath. It's not a farewell, it's just the city breathing. You walk slower now, not because your boots are worn, though they are, but because you want to remember the rhythm, the echo of hooves, the wheeze of steam, the quiet tap of a clerk's pen against a cracked window. These sounds live in you now. At the edge of the city, you stop. You turn back and look, not at anything in particular, just at the shape of the streets, the flavor of the air, the feeling of survival. You smile. You survived Victorian London. And you did it without dying of fog. You've walked the soot-slick streets. You've wrapped yourself in wool against the creeping fog. You've squinted through coal smoke, laughed with match girls, and learned to fear eel pie, but only slightly. Now, as the gas lamps dim and the last clatter of hooves fades into the London dusk, your breath slows. Let it. Feel the room around you, quiet, still. Maybe your blanket shifts gently with the breeze from a fan. Maybe the air smells faintly of lavender or old paper. Let that quiet wrap around you like a well-loved coat. Picture the fog outside your window, soft and slow, curling through the streets, blurring harsh corners into something kind. Imagine the distant chime of a church bell, deep and low, echoing just once before fading into stillness. Your boots are by the door, your scarf hangs, waiting. But you're not going out tonight, not anymore. The city sleeps, or at least dreams with one eye open, but for now it can dream without you. In this moment, nothing is demanded. Nothing needs to be remembered or fixed or written down. Only rest. You've earned it. Let the fog settle. Let your thoughts drift like smoke above a sleeping chimney. Let the silence stretch, long and warm and quiet. You're safe, you're home. And the city, full of coal and charm and unwashed windows, will still be here tomorrow. Tschüss. Good night.